We're joined by Tony O'Donnell, Regional Head of Change Outsourcing, Offshoring for UBS Investment Bank. How are you today, Tony?
Very well, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good. Tony, how will the rapidly changing global economy impact the strategies and operations of today's SSO?
I think that, and we've heard in some of the sessions already today that it is changing. There's more pressure. It's changing the dynamics. The velocity of change is increasing, and therefore, fundamentally, simplistic models such as outsourcing, captives, the black and white models probably they still will exist and they still are appropriate, but people are, again, a lot of people are starting to talk about hybrid models, and it's very much the horses for courses. So I think that also as companies have done the basics. They've done the basics, they've got the cost arbitrage. That to some extent is disappearing. It's not necessarily completely gone. So again, if you then want to look at what's left, what can you do? You've got to start thinking a bit more innovatively and a bit more creatively about how can you solve your problems, and to some extent, how do you do that with some of the outsourced providers as opposed to you having to solve it yourself?
Can you talk about the typical stereotypes of today's SSO? In your opinion, what would be the new view of modern SSO structure?
Again, well, to me, the stereotype is it's very linear. So it's like, it's very segregated. You have a very let's call it mass production. So it's like you have an area that does X and it only does X. And up until now, probably people have focused, you focus on your low-hanging fruit, okay? So to that extent, you're going to take the stuff that's got the biggest benefit, it's got the most people doing the same level of job. And the original objective was, again, cost arbitrage, whereas now it's much more around, okay, now we've got the cost arbitrage, that's disappearing. How do we improve what we do? How do we get more efficient? How do we get more effective? And therefore the complexity of what you're trying to achieve increases. But then you also need to start looking up at the front to back process or the value chain within the company, and understanding that it's not, you can't just take it as non-dependent, independent areas. You've got to start looking at it a bit more holistically, depending on the business and the industry, I guess. But it's just not so simple anymore.
Let's talk about partnerships. What would be the future of outsourcing partnerships, and how different or similar do you think will it be to today's model?
Well, so I think the answer's in the question, right? I.e. partnerships, right? So, today we've heard a lot of debate around captives versus outsourcing. People are talking about the fact that there's probably something in the middle, and I think there is. Certainly, and I certainly believe that for the investment banking industry, that in order to do what the industry needs to do in terms of becoming more efficient and reducing costs, it has to create an industry supply chain. Now, that industry supply chain does not exist today, okay, in essence. So the question then comes, well, if it doesn't exist today, who's going to create it today? Now, if you take manufacturing, right, that the supply chain in certain manufacturing industries took several decades or more to develop, right? And that was a combination of, even in that case, that was a combination of some of the manufacturers creating the supply chain by doing a joint venture and getting rid of some of their value chain, right? Or innovators coming into the market and saying, well, we could do this cheaper, give us your business. So I think certainly if you take the banking industry, you can see it going down the same path. The question is, how quickly do we want that to happen? And there is a lot of pressure to reduce costs, which means my view is that if we're going to get there, we have to help create that supply chain as an industry so that the industry can benefit. And that will therefore involve partnerships of various different guises, I guess.
Right. That was a very good insight. Talking about UBS Investment Bank, what important lessons can other organizations learn from your company, UBS Investment Bank, in terms of business transformation?
I don't think, in fairness, my background is originally manufacturing. So, investment banking does some things very well, but in the context of this topic, SSO, I don't think it's really about banking learning from any other industry. I don't think it's about industries learning from investment banking. UBS is not unique, right? So you can look at investment banking as an industry. I don't think it's about people learning from us. I think it's about us learning from other industries, or even adjacent industries, other financial services sectors, right? I think, and again, it's not specific to UBS, but I think if there's companies out there that want to try and learn something, what you're going to learn from the investment banking industry is kind of what not to do as opposed to what you should do, right? And if you look at the investment banking industry and how it's created itself, how it's grown over the last several decades, very vertically aligned, not very horizontal, very short-term focus on delivering products to markets for very specific needs. And some of the problems it's facing today is the fact that it's got so many strands of different things going on but to try and react to regulatory change and cost pressures makes solutions very, very expensive because you have to replicate them across many different areas of the business. So the more that banking again focuses horizontally in terms of utilities or single platforms or single processes, obviously the better shape it's going to be. So.
And finally, in one word, if you were to describe the current state of the SSO industry in Asia, what would it be?
Not an expert on this subject, but I would call it developing. Yeah. Again, one of the speakers pointed out just in the last session that problem with Asia is that as a region, it's a big region, but it's very fragmented, right? And again, if you look at the banking industry, you can go to Europe and there's pretty much not one regulatory body, but there's a very much more consistent, coherent approach to regulation and how banks operate, how the industry operates within Europe, right? You can go to obviously North America, which is singular in itself, and again has some conflicts within different regulators in the US, but it's much more coherent. You come to Asia and many developing economies, everyone's doing their own thing, whether it's the regulatory level or the national level, and therefore to try and get economies of scale in approach, whether it's SSO or just managing your business, is quite difficult still, and therefore that flows through to SSO, and it's something that is going to take time to mature.
Okay.